Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Peter Langen. I'm the first Vice President of the club and your MC for today. Before I introduce our speaker, can I ask if everyone could please, I include myself in this as well, mute your cell phones to prevent any interruptions. Okay, so our speaker today, Mr. Tetsuo Kotani, Senior Fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs. Mr. Kotani has a particular specialty in the US-Japan alliance, maritime security, and also geopolitical issues. He's also just told me he spends an awful lot of time traveling, visiting many countries, discussing these issues. He's recently returned from trips to Washington, where, as you can probably imagine, the US presidential election was a major topic of discussion. He's also just returned from China, where again, the US presidential election was a topic of discussion. So he's speaking to us today on all these issues. So can we have a warm welcome, please, for Mr. Tetsuo Kotani? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thanks for the invitation to FCC Japan. This is my first time to speak at this club. Although I have spoken before the FCC in China, which is not the official organization in Beijing, but we sometimes have meetings in some embassies or even bar when the Japan-China relations was very difficult. It is a very privileged honor to speak on Japan's security policy today. So this morning, North Korea tested 2 short-range ballistic missiles, and I think this is a response to the ongoing US ROK massive military exercise. In the meantime, China is now militarizing the South China Sea disputes in the South China Sea, and also China is trying to establish a kind of a new normal in the East China Sea with more frequent presence and intrusion. So I'll try to explain my take on the implication of Japan's new security legislation for those regional security issues. Last year, we witnessed a huge demonstration against the new security legislation, and lots of old people and even the young students rallied against this security legislation. They regarded the security legislation as unconstitutional, but to me, this is just a small but necessary step to secure the security of Japan. So let me explain why this is a small but necessary step. Well, Prime Minister Abe has been advocating the concept of proactive contribution to peace. The question is what it means. And my take of this concept is it's a realistic balance of power approach based on the realistic assessment of regional and global security environment. In the past, after World War II, in Japanese society, the notion of one nation pacifism prevailed. Many Japanese believed as long as Japan was safe, it was okay, and Japan didn't have to care about what's going on in the region and in the world. But I think Prime Minister Abe's concept of proactive contribution to peace is basically a denial of this one nation pacifism, because Japan's security and prosperity heavily relies on the stability in the region and the world. So to secure the Japan's security and prosperity, Japan needs to contribute more for the regional and global securities. And by doing so, Japan's own security will be secured. That's my take on the proactive contribution to peace. And of course, for Japan, the number one challenge, longer term number one challenge would be the rise of Chinese power. And when you face a rise in power, you basically have three options. One is to accommodate the rise in power. And the second is to increase your own power to balance. And the third option is to work with other like-minded nations to balance the rise in power. I think the DPJ government, the former government of Japan, particularly under Prime Minister Hatoyama, took the first option. The DPJ government tried to accommodate the rise in Chinese power, but the consequence was, China became more aggressive. So Prime Minister Abe, after he returned to power, he took the combination of the second and third options, meaning the internal and external balancing vis-à-vis China. For internal balancing, the easiest way, in some sense, is to go nuclear. But for obvious reasons, this is not in Japan's strategic interest. For example, if we go nuclear, that will undermine the credibility of U.S.-Japan alliance, and that will promote more nuclear proliferation. So this is not Japan's security interest. The second option is to increase your own defense budget. But again, this is obviously very difficult. Although Prime Minister Abe has successfully increased the defense budget over the several years, but in real term, our defense budget is flat. And I think this trend will continue to be the case. So for Prime Minister Abe, the only way to increase Japan's defense power was to relax the self-imposed restriction on Japan's security policy. And this is why Prime Minister Abe needed to reinterpret the Constitution and passed the security legislation. But the security legislation will not bring dramatic change in Japan's security policy. Of course, the exercise of collective self-defense is something new for post-World War II Japan, but the condition to exercise collective self-defense is very much constrained. Unless Japan's national security, Japan's national survival is threatened, Japan cannot exercise collective self-defense. So to me, this is just an individual self-defense plus, rather than a collective self-defense. So many Japanese misunderstood the exercise of collective self-defense would allow Japan to engage in the US-led war. But this is totally untrue. Unless Japan's security is threatened, Japan cannot exercise collective self-defense. So the implication of the security legislation is that if Japan is attacked and the United States forces are defending Japan, then Japan's self-defense force can defend Japan with the United States. In the past, self-defense force cannot defend Japan with the United States. But as an alliance, unless we can have a combined joint response to a common enemy, the credibility of the alliance will be undermined. So this is why Prime Minister Abe needed to reinterpret the Constitution. In the past, Japan might not have to exercise collective self-defense because US military power was very strong. But today, the relative strength of US power is now declining. So Japan needed to change the interpretation of the Constitution. So for internal balancing, Prime Minister Abe has passed the security legislation, but also Prime Minister Abe is trying to work with other like-minded nations And the United States is, of course, the number one partner for Japan. So last year, the Tokyo and Washington revised the bilateral defense cooperation guidelines. And under the new guidelines, the integration of Japanese-American operations very much strengthened. And that will strengthen the credibility of the alliance very much. But the United States is not the only important ally for us today. Australia is another important partner. India is also becoming very important for Japan. And before Prime Minister Abe returned to power, he advocated the concept of a democratic security diamond among Japan, US, Australia, and India. But after he took the office, what he really pursued was the combination of double triangles: US, Japan, Australia, and US, Japan, India. And the important point is these two triangles overlap in the Southeast Asia and the South China Sea. So for Japan, the ASEAN is another important partner for diplomacy and security policy. So Prime Minister Abe has been taking very proactive diplomacy with ASEAN member countries, and also Japan has been increasing the capacity building assistance for countries like the Philippines and Vietnam. So by the combination of the internal and external balancing, Japan is trying to secure its security and the prosperity. So the question is, what implication this security restoration will have for the North Korean situation and the East China Sea and South China Sea situation? For North Korea, it's obvious that under the new security restoration and under the new guidelines, Japan is now better able to provide the necessary assistance for both US forces and South Korean military. If the situation is designated as the one that have a huge impact on the security of Japan, Japan is now able to provide logistical support without geographical constraint. And this support is not only for the US military, but also Japan is now able to provide logistical support for the other countries' forces working with the US. So that will include South Korean military. And so under the new security legislation, Japan can provide more support for the US ROK alliance, and we can support the credibility of the US ROK alliance vis-a-vis North Korea. My institute, Japan Institute of International Affairs, has launched a project to do a reality check of the new security legislation. And recently, we conducted a tabletop exercise. And we witnessed in 1994 the North Korean nuclear crisis, and we did our tabletop exercise assuming that 1994 crisis occurred this year, 2016, under the new security legislation. And our finding is that Japan is now able to provide the necessary logistical support for the US forces and the Korean military under the new security legislation. But still, we witnessed the challenges remaining. For example, the NEO, non-combatant evacuation operation. This will continue to be very difficult because under the new security legislation, self-defense force can evacuate the Japanese nationals in Korean Peninsula only in the case there's no actual combat is occurring. So if the Seoul is under attack, the self-defense force cannot evacuate Japanese national from Seoul. So this is a huge challenge, even under the security legislation. And also, for the North Korean crisis, for example, Japan needs to work with the United States and North Korea to intercept the North Korean missiles. But for operational cooperation among the three, there's no official scheme to coordinate our operations. So I think, of course, Japan and the ROK needs to conclude GSOMIA and also AXA for better operations. But beyond that, I think we need to establish a formal coordination mechanism among the three countries. For East China Sea situation, the East China Sea situation is basically a Japanese problem. We don't have a Chinese military challenge in the East China Sea because still the military balance favors Japan and the United States in the East China Sea. But because the military balance still favors Japan, China is taking measures short of war. China is dispatching Coast Guard ships instead of warships. China has been using the fishery boats to challenge the Japanese administration of Senkaku Islands. And the Japanese defense planners now call the situation as gray zone coercion. And the question is whether we can deter the Chinese gray zone coercion. My personal take, my tentative conclusion is that maybe Japan can deter the China militarily with the United States, but Japan cannot deter the Chinese gray zone coercion. Because even after Japan passed the national security legislation and revised the defense guidelines with the United States, Chinese increasing its paramilitary challenge in the East China Sea. The end of last year, for example, Chinese Coast Guard ships were armed, and also Chinese warships conducted military surveillance activities around the Senkaku waters. So in that sense, China is still making the color of gray darker and darker. And at this moment, Japan doesn't have effective countermeasures to those Chinese gray zone coercion. And I think this will continue to be a challenge even after the security legislation is implemented. And lastly, for the South China Sea, I think this South China Sea issue is very serious at this moment. And I think the reason China has been militarizing the South China Sea dispute is to make the South China Sea a Chinese lake. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union made the Sea of Okhotsk a strategic bastion for Soviet strategic ballistic missile submarines. And likewise, China is now deploying the strategic submarines based in Hainan Island. And although these new strategic submarines don't carry a longer range ballistic missile yet, but many experts expect that Chinese submarines will carry the longer range ballistic missiles within a few years. Even if China successfully deploys those strategic submarines based in the South China Sea, that wouldn't harm the U.S. deterrence posture in this region dramatically. But over the longer term, as China secures the South China Sea and even beyond the first island chain, a strategic bastion for China, that might undermine the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. And that will have a huge impact on the Japan's security. So I think Japan needs to consider how to engage in the South China Sea issue. And so far, Japan's engagement in the South China Sea issue is the capacity building for the South China Sea countries, particularly the Philippines and Vietnam. For example, Japan will provide 10 patrol boats to the Philippine Coast Guard, and Japan has already provided 6 patrol boats to the Vietnamese Coast Guard. So far, Japan has been contributing to the constabulary power of the other claimant states. And my personal mentor, the late Ambassador Hisahiko Okazaki, once stated, the Japan's South China Sea strategy should be to establish a mini Japan Coast Guard in the South China Sea, plus mini maritime self-defense force in the South China Sea. So Japan has been trying to establish mini Japan Coast Guard in the South China Sea, but I think Japan needs to take a further step to create a kind of a mini maritime self-defense force in the South China Sea. So to do so, I think Japan needs to provide assistance for the countries like Philippines and Vietnam so that they can actually establish a defense foundation. When Japan was defeated in the World War II, we needed to demobilize the Imperial Army and Navy. But the United States provided a huge assistance to Japan so that Japan can establish the self-defense force in the 1950s. But it took 20 years for a self-defense force to become a decent military. So, I think it takes decades for the other South China Sea claimants can have a decent military. When the Chinese military buildup is rapidly ongoing. So I think Japan needs to, shift its focus from Coast Guard buildup to military buildup as soon as possible. And another question I've been asked by many people is whether Japan will send self-defense force to the South China Sea or not. My understanding is that there is no consensus yet among the government officials. But my personal take is that Japan should engage in surveillance activities in the South China Sea, and also Japan should join the U.S. freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea. For the surveillance issue, I think, as I said, as China is deploying the submarines in the South China Sea, we have to continue to follow the locations of Chinese submarines in the South China Sea. And in this region, only the United States and Japan can do such a job. In the East China Sea, Japan has been locating the Chinese submarines. But in the South China Sea, the US is doing this job. But if Japan joins the submarine chasing activities in the South China Sea, that will help the United States a lot, and that will contribute to the defense of Japan a lot. So I think Japan should join the surveillance in the South China Sea. And for the freedom of navigation operations, when the International Tribunal will make a decision, the Philippines effort for the arbitration will see certain decision as early as June this year. And I think the International Tribunal will make a decision on the legal status of the Chinese occupied reefs, whether they are legally claimed reefs or they are just rocks under the sea. And if the tribunal makes a decision on the legal status, I think Chinese land reclamation and artificial island building will lose the legal foundation. But there's no measures to impose this tribunal's decision on China. And I think China will just ignore the International Tribunal's decision. But I think the international community needs to work together to enforce the tribunal's decision on China. So not only the United States, but also other regional countries needs to conduct the freedom of navigation operations inside the 12 nautical miles from the Chinese occupied reefs to show that the Chinese activities in the South China Sea has no legal foundation. Otherwise, I don't think we can change the Chinese behavior in the South China Sea. But under the new security legislation, I think Japan can do both surveillance and freedom of navigation operations with the other like-minded countries. So I think that's all I have, and I'll happy to take any question or comment. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kotani, for that very interesting assessment. So we'll have questions first from the working press. After that, if we have time, I'll open it up to the whole floor. But first, Tim.
Tim Kelly from Reuters. The North Korean missile was so that the Japanese Defense Ministry believes, or they suspect, it was a Scud C with a 500-kilometer range. So this is a step up from the usual ship-to-shore missiles that they put into the Japan Sea. How much of a threat does this represent? Is this kind of an escalation, and is this escalation connected with the claim that they've miniaturized a thermonuclear device for missiles? Do you see us entering a new phase of provocation from North Korea? And at what point should Japan kind of start really getting worried? When should we start digging our bunkers? When they start testing nodongs and they're putting those into the Sea of Japan? What's going to happen? What do you see happening over the next year or two?
Thank you. I think one thing we have to consider is the North Korean Labor Party will have a General Assembly in this coming May. And this assembly is a very important venue for Kim Jong-un to increase his own authority. So I assume until this assembly is done, I think North Korea will gradually escalate the situation. And I think the launch of the Scud missile this morning is just one step. And we have to prepare any type of provocation from North Korea. Maybe they will, next step might be the test of the Nodon missile, which can cover entire Japan. They may try to seek another nuclear test. And also you can assume North Korea will conduct a similar provocation, such as the bombardment of the Yongbyon Island or sinking of Cheonan warship a couple of years ago. And the difficult issue is we don't know what's really going on in North Korea. Some people might think Kim Jong-un is losing his mind. And obviously, Kim Jong-un's behavior is unpredictable. But so far, the military balance is completely favors Japan, US, and ROK. And although North Korea claims that they are a nuclear state, but so far North Korea has not been successful to launching a nuclear warhead on the ballistic missile, and I personally wonder whether we can call their rockets as a missile, because the difference between a missile and a rocket is you have to re-enter the warhead into the atmosphere. But the re-entry vehicle is a very difficult technology, and we don't believe North Korea has succeeded in the development of the re-entry. So yes, North Korea may have several nuclear bombs, but they don't have a means to carry those bombs to the foreign countries. So I don't think we have to worry too much by the North Korean provocation, but you know, anything under the armed attack can happen. And as I said, in the East China Sea situation, it's very difficult to deter this gray zone challenge, either from China or North Korea. So I think the key would be how to strengthen the coordination among the relevant countries, particularly Japan, US, ROK.
Does that cover your points, Tim? Yeah. So Isabel was next.
Isabel Reynolds from Bloomberg. I was wondering if Prime Minister Abe has now been in office for more than 3 years. Would you be able to give him a sort of a mark out of 10 for what he's done in the realm of security policy? What's been good? Should there have been more done in particular areas? And I have a second question. You mentioned that you'd been in America recently. If there were to be a President Trump in future, how would that affect the US-Japan alliance?
Thank you. For grading Prime Minister Abe, I think should I give a number or alphabet? Maybe 8 out of 10. You know, before the Abe government made a decision on the reinterpretation of the Constitution, Prime Minister Abe's personal advisory board made a recommendation. And that recommendation was basically advocating a full exercise of collective self-defense and a full participation in the international security cooperation. But immediately after this report was out, Prime Minister Abe denied the report's recommendation, and he said Japan can only exercise the collective self-defense on a minimum term, and Japan cannot fully participate in the security activities. You know, under this current constitution. So the question is whether the Constitution allows the full exercise of collective self-defense and the full participation in the security activities. And my position is almost identical to his advisor's recommendation, that Japan can exercise fully the collective self-defense. That's my personal position. But for, I think, political reasons, Prime Minister Abe couldn't support this recommendation. So this is why I think Prime Minister Abe now has only 8 grade. President Trump. Yes, I discussed this issue with many Americans and Japanese colleagues in Washington last week. And some people say President Donald Trump might be a common enemy for both Japan and the United States. But my take is that yes, Mr. Trump has been saying a lot of things, and he even stated the U.S.-Japan alliance is unequal. But I think this is only for the campaign. And if he becomes a president, I think he needs to take a more realistic approach, particularly for allies. And last week, some Republicans signed on the list that they don't support for the President Trump. But many Japanese friends in the Republicans didn't sign. And I met some of the Americans who didn't sign that list, and I asked why, and he told me, if Mr. Trump becomes a president, somebody has to provide the realistic advice on Asia and Japan. So although they don't personally support Donald Trump, but for the country, they have to provide the realistic advice to Donald Trump. That's why they didn't sign. So yes, I think many Japanese are concerned about what Donald Trump has been saying in the campaign. But if he becomes a president, we have many friends in Republican who are willing to provide the realistic advice. So I'm not so much worried at this moment, although I'm not so much optimistic.
So did you have a question?
Seth Robson from Stars and Stripes. You're just mentioning that the Japanese Self-Defense Force can provide logistical support to the South Koreans in the event of a conflict. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that and tell us what kind of logistical support they could provide and how much.
Thank you. Under the new defense cooperation guidelines, there are the list of items which Japan can provide to U.S. and other forces, including the provision of ammunition and fuel, water, and other necessary goods. And also we can provide medical support, and we are now able to provide our commercial facilities for the other forces to use. And before we revised the guidelines last year, we were also able to provide logistical support for the U.S. forces only. But there was a very tough restriction that we could provide those supports only inside the Japanese territorial waters. But under the new guidelines, there's no geographical constraints. So we are able to provide support up to the Korean territorial waters. And if South Korea allows, we can even provide logistical support inside the South Korean territorial waters. So I think that's a huge change.
Siegfried?
Siegfried Niddle, writing for the Austrian newspaper, The Standard. You said you are supporting the common collective kind of patrols in the South China Sea with Japanese military navy and Chinese U.S. Navy. So, but normally in the area, in the South China Sea area, all countries, without the exception of the U.S., don't use act with a navy. Vietnam only uses in the problems with the conflict with China, only Coast Guard. Philippines does the same. Japan would be the only country using the Navy. So in this way, would this not escalate the conflict in the South China Sea very much?
Thank you. China has been already justifying the land reclamation and the deployment of missiles and the fighter jets in the South China Sea as a response to the U.S. freedom navigation operation. So, and China criticized the U.S. is actually militarizing the South China Sea. From an objective point of view, I think it's obvious China is actually militarizing the South China Sea dispute. So as long as the U.S. is the only country conducting the freedom navigation operation, challenging the Chinese unilateral claims, China can always utilize this U.S. response as an excuse. But if other countries joins the U.S. actions, I think that will provide more legitimacy for the U.S. actions. So I think Japan, as a U.S. ally, important ally, at least Japan needs to join, and I will welcome Australia. And I also welcome British or French into this international freedom of navigation operation. And India might be difficult because Indians' interpretation of the law of the sea is almost identical to the Chinese. So I don't think we can expect India to join, but at least the world's major maritime nations to conduct the freedom navigation operation in the South China Sea.
Sir, yes.
Takashi Koyama, freelance. I don't think you differentiated between limited collective self-defense and collective self-defense, but well, in either case, the Japanese self-defense force don't have the capability to conduct that collective self-defense. They don't have the weapons, they don't have the training. So how in the world is Prime Minister Abe going to order his men to take part in collective self-defense if the self-defense has never conducted an exercise, don't have the weapons, ammunitions, everything? And on North Korea, I asked Mr. Albright of ISIS more than 10 years ago if the North Koreans had succeeded in miniaturizing the nuclear weapons. And he told me to miniaturize it to about 1 millimeter, 1 meter was not that difficult. So even more than 10 years ago, he said that he thought North Korea probably had a small nuclear weapon. And isn't it also possible for them, for the North Koreans, to put that in an airplane and drop it over Seoul? They don't have to put it on a rocket or a missile. They could put it on a bomber or an airplane and drop it. Wouldn't that be possible?
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I can catch your question correctly, but to exercise the collective self-defense, you don't have to have a huge military. To exercise the collective self-defense, you just can use force to do something, and I think Japan has a weapon and Japan has ammunition, and we, even under the current security restoration, Japan is able to provide certain. Japan can exercise the collective self-defense on a minimum term, and we may be able to conduct, for example, mine sweeping or non-combatant evacuation operations on the Korean Peninsula. And yes, the self-defense force may not be able to conduct expeditionary operations fully, but we have certain capabilities. And if we have to exercise collective self-defense, we will do just whatever we can. And if that is the case, I don't think, that doesn't mean Japan doesn't have any capabilities or weapons or ammunition. And regarding the North Korean nuclear capabilities, there's no clear assessment yet. Some assessment says North Korea has already successfully miniaturized the warhead, and some assessment has an opposite view. And so, of course, we have to prepare any possibility. But so far, North Korea has not demonstrated its capability to deliver the nuclear weapons outside the North Korean border. So, but that doesn't mean in the future North Korea cannot obtain such a capability. So at this moment, we have to prepare the possible North Korean provocation. But at the same time, we have to prepare the possibility that North Korea will possess the nuclear attack capabilities in the future. And I think already the governments are taking necessary steps.
Can I ask a question myself? Mr. Abe seems very keen on a meeting with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, which has annoyed the United States to some extent. Could you comment on why is Mr. Abe so keen on this meeting?
I think we have several explanations. One is, of course, because Japan has a territorial dispute with Russia, and we have to continue our negotiation. So we have to keep the door open. And second explanation is because for Japan, the rise of China is the #1 challenge, and we need to work with Russia to balance the rise in China. And third explanation is more domestic driven issue, but I'm aware that the many Japanese Russian experts were upset when the Obama administration suddenly announced the reset with Russia a couple of years ago. Although Japan had been following the US policy on Russia, and many Russian experts regarded that reset as a betray. So after that, some Japanese Russian experts tend to take a different approach from American. So I think the combination of these three can explain a little bit about Prime Minister Abe's approach to Putin. And maybe the personal chemistry might be good.
Okay, I can open the questions to the floor if anyone else has any questions for our speaker today. Yes, sir.
Makoto Honjo, associate. We hear very often about Japan, US, Australia, or Japan, US, India. And it seems to be that India is, as you have also sort of agreed, are not too interested in East and South China Sea issues, and they are more interested in their turf, which is out there around the Indian subcontinent. And why is it these two countries? Is it that these three countries, or India and Australia comes in, but never South Korea.
Oh. Thank you. Well, of course, the trilateral among the Japan, U.S., South Korea is also important, but the impact is a bit different, because Japan, U.S., Australia, Japan, U.S., India can have a regional impact. I think India also has a huge interest in at least the South China Sea issue. They have a economic interest, and also they are very much interested in the securing the navigation through the South China Sea. So the trilateral with Australia and India can have a broader regional impact, but when it comes to the trilateral with South Korea, the impact is only on the Korean Peninsula. So for the North Korean issues, of course, South Korea is a very important partner, but we tend to discuss, when we discuss the broader regional issues, we tend to refer to only Australia and India.
Yes, sir, at the back.
Thank you, Mike Brook. You referenced a scenario under which the Japanese Navy would join the US Navy in surveillance of the South China Sea. And your suggestion was that by doing so, if I understood correctly, by doing so, that would improve the surveillance as well as the possibility of bringing about change in China's behavior, if I understood correctly. The former of the two I understand. The latter, could you be more specific as to how, short of an armed conflict, such activity could modify or bring about change in the Chinese behavior vis-à-vis that part of the world, please? Thank you.
Well, so again, at this moment, the United States is the only country challenging the Chinese unilateral actions in the South China Sea by demonstrating its military power. But China has been using those U.S. military actions as an excuse for further militarization of the South China Sea. For example, last month, China deployed the anti-air missile in the Paracel Island, but they explained this is a response to the recent U.S. freedom of navigation operations through the Paracels. So the U.S. is now criticizing the Chinese militarization, but China is criticizing U.S. militarization. And I think the basic problem is this is only a U.S.-China context. But if other international partners joins the U.S. Military action, I think that will provide more legitimacy for the U.S. action. And by doing so, China may have to consider the negative implications of the Chinese unilateral actions. And the more international partners join, the more I think we can have better leverage on the Chinese behavior.
Do you have any more questions? Siegfried?
This way you showed Japan should get closer to Australia, to India, and does it not lead to a kind of a containment policy? And from a containment policy, then China will feel much more threatened than now.
Well, obviously, we cannot contain China. China is not the Soviet Union. We have a deep economic engagement with China. So containment is not a realistic option for any country in this region. What China is doing is basically a challenge to the existing rules-based regional order. China is inside the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea scheme, but they are behaving against the convention. And the regional order in this region is based on the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty, but China is not a party to the San Francisco Treaty. And for example, Japan gave up the parcels and the spratteries under the San Francisco Peace Treaty. But the San Francisco Peace Treaty was not clear enough to which country those islands would be returned. So China says those islands returned to China, and Vietnam said, those islands returned to Vietnam, and the Philippines said those islands returned to Philippines. So that's the basic problem. But the China is the only country now physically challenging this San Francisco peace system. And for many countries, including China, obtained a huge benefit from this rules-based international order. So I think international society and community needs to work to preserve this rules-based order. But if China continues to challenge this rules-based order, I think the other members of the regional community need to work together to meet the challenge from China. But this is not containing China. We are trying to shape Chinese behavior so that China can enjoy the benefits under the existing order.
Okay, we'll bring the press conference to a close here. My last act is to give Mr. Kotani 1 year honorary membership of the FCCJ, which comes to all our speakers.
Yes, thank you very much.
And thank you for your very interesting comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.